Welcome to the LSU Sports Insider, brought to you by the journalists at The Advocate, NOLA.com, and the Times-Picayune. Perryn Keys here on the left side of your screen, hanging out with Koki Riley, as we have done several times now on the LSU Sports Insider podcast. Welcome in. Koki, of course, he's actually back home. We are not in studio, but he is back home in Baton Rouge, but only for a faint moment. He is going to obviously get on a plane here shortly and head to Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where the LSU baseball team faces Wofford first. And should they win, face the winner between North Carolina and Long Island University. So we will get into it. Obviously this is the time of year that everybody starts paying attention to LSU baseball in earnest, aside from just the hardcore fans. And so here we are. Koki, tell me, what do you think about this? Obviously came out on Memorial Day, as it always does, on Selection Monday for the NCAA baseball tournament. And so tell me, first and foremost, were you surprised by the draw? Were you surprised that they wound up in Chapel Hill? I'm sure that you were hoping quietly and secretly that they would end up in Santa Barbara instead, but nonetheless, Chapel Hill is not exactly a consolation prize. Just tell me what you think about the draw for LSU.
Yeah, I find it to be a really interesting draw, and I find it to be a very difficult draw for really all the teams involved, even outside of obviously Long Island as the 4 seed. For North Carolina, I mean, to win the ACC in the regular season, which is the second best conference in college baseball, and then to end up with the defending national champions and a pretty frisky Wofford team, that's not, the committee's not doing you any favors by doing that. Then for LSU's sake, I mean, to get all the way to the SEC tournament championship game, to be as hot as they are right now, to still end up with facing a team that could very well win the whole thing in North Carolina, like, that's not easy. And then they have to face Wofford before that, and Wofford's a frisky team. We'll get into why Wofford's kind of a frisky team. I mean, they're one of the best offenses in the country, just based on the numbers. So it's going to be a really, really fun regional, and I think LSU definitely has a shot to win it, but it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be a cakewalk at all.
So, well, let's talk about that just sort of at the outset. Where does LSU stand? Obviously, North Carolina is one of the better seeds, one of the better teams, and has proven itself to be so over the regular season. Where does LSU stand in terms of, if you were to put, I understand we can go back and look at Las Vegas and see what they say, but if you were LSU, Koki, if you were the grand overlord of the odds, where would you put LSU's chances at succeeding and at advancing out of the regional and making it to Omaha? Are they 50-50? Are they 40-60, 30-70, 45-55? Anywhere in that number? What would you? Let's get down to brass tacks. Where do you feel that they should be?
I think it's somewhere between 35 and 45, I'd say. So 40 to say short.
Yeah.
I think between them and UNC, I think UNC should be a slight favorite, just given the way that they've played this season. Even though the ACC is not the SEC, this is a really good offense, like a really, really good offense. And we'll get into why exactly later.
There's a reason they're hosting.
Yeah. And they're hosting, obviously. And Wofford, before that, like, LSU could lose to Wofford in the first game. It wouldn't shock me. Like, this is one of the best offenses in the nation. They average 10.2 runs per game. They have an outfielder in Marshall Toole who's hitting .380 with 42 stolen bases this season. I mean, this team plays some rock and roll baseball. Wofford does, and they have one ace, and he'll likely pitch against LSU in that first game on Friday. So again, that's not going to be easy. Even though I obviously a lot of Wofford's numbers are skewed because of the competition they face, but at the same time, it isn't anything you can sneeze at. So that's all I'm saying. And once you get through that game, you get Luke Holman against one of the best teams in the nation. So it's going to be really, really fascinating to see. If LSU can win those first 2 games, I think they're going to move on. But if they can't, then it's going to be a real uphill battle for them because just because of how good UNC is. Even though UNC's pitching depth isn't amazing, they still have some relievers who can go a little bit longer. They still have a legit 1-2 punch at the top of their rotation, unlike most teams in the country. So it's not like you're going to face someone who's that much worse than their number 1 guy on that in a theoretical Saturday game. So if LSU can win the first 2 games, I think they're going to move on. But it's going to be hard to win those first 2 games. I think, especially the second game, obviously. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it all shakes out.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. We have discussed, particularly on the previous podcast, the most recent podcast we did before this one, that sort of quietly Luke Holman and Gage Jump have turned themselves into maybe one of the best 1-2 punches in the SEC. And therefore, if you're one of the best 1-2 punches in the SEC, as far as a starting rotation, you're probably one of the best in the nation. What do you expect to see? LSU is going to play Wofford at 11 a.m. Central Time, noon, where you're going to be obviously Koki and Chapel Hill here in a short minute. Mm-hmm. What do you expect to see? Do you expect to see one versus the other, or really, for that matter, does it matter? And what do you expect to see, and what do you think LSU's chances are, given the fact that, yes, after all has been said and done, after LSU has gone all through a tumultuous season, the fact of the matter is that the Gage Jump and Luke Holman still are, no matter how you slice it, 2 of the better weekend starters that you could ever hope to have. And so with that in mind, tell me what you think about all this.
Yeah, I think LSU probably has the best pitching in the regional. I think the numbers between them and UNC are pretty close if you look at the overall numbers. Friday Starters is sort of like a Twitter site / website that does a really good job of comparing the resumes of all these teams, whether it's RPI or strength of schedule, or just the amount of home runs they've hit this season, or both teams' on base percentage and relative to the rest of the country. If you just look at the rankings in terms of offensively, Wofford probably has the best offense just in terms of pure rankings. Like, they're 3rd in the country in batting average, they're 3rd in the country in on base percentage, they're 2nd in the country in runs per game. I'm telling you, this is a really explosive offense. And it's going to be very interesting to see. It's going to be a challenge, I think, for Gage Jump. And granted, Gage Jump's probably going to be the best pitcher Wofford has faced all year. I'd be surprised if they have faced anyone at his caliber this season. And given the way that Gage is pitching, you'd figure that he could definitely tame this really dangerous lineup. But if they get a guy on base, that guy's going to try to steal second base. To give you an idea of how many bases this team steals, I'm quickly looking it up right now, but this team has 144 stolen bases this season. LSU stolen bases this season is somewhere in the 30s. It's right, not even close. This team plays a completely different level of baseball, and it's not like they don't have any power too. I mean, they have 3 guys with 12 or more home runs. So, I mentioned Marshall Tua's 42 stolen bases, but then you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 other guys who have 10 or more stolen bases after him. So they're gonna steal bases. They're gonna take extra bags. They're gonna hit home runs. They slug. They get on base. Like, this team does it all. Does everything offensively. And pitching wise, they don't have a lot of depth. Like, that's really the weakness of this team, especially with their starting depth. But they do have one guy, and that guy is Zach Cowan. He pitched twice last week, including his second start came on 3 days rest, which is kind of wild. They really, really pushed this kid, and he pitched great in both those outings. And I think he threw 13 innings last week. I don't think he gave up a run. He might have given up a run or 2, and that was it. So, and they needed to win 6 games in 7 days last week just to win the SoCon. So, energy could be a question mark for them. Pitching depth is going to be a question mark for them after Cowan. How many guys who can even possibly hold down this LSU lineup? That's going to be the biggest question for them. And that's why I think LSU's probably almost definitely the favorite to win this game. But I also don't think it's like, a 90-10 cakewalk. I don't think they're not facing Grambling. Like, I think that's the best way to put this. This is closer to Nichols. It may probably better than Nichols, if I'm being honest, because Nichols RPI is right in the 80s. Wofford's RPI is in the top 50 in the country. So this is a good team. And LSU can't just, putz around in this game. They have to pitch, gauge, jump, and they have to definitely try. And you're going to get a fight from them, and then you're going to face a North Carolina team that, again, is one of the better lineups in the country. That was that won the ACC regular season title. That's fourth in the country in RPI. This is an excellent team. Like, this is an SEC caliber team that you're going to have to face against. They have one of the best lineups in the nation. Parks Harbor was one of the best hitters. It was one of the best hitters in the entire ACC this season. 763 slugging percentage. He played at Georgia the last few seasons. So I'd imagine LSU at least has some familiarity with him. Vance Honeycutt was expected to be like one of the top picks in this year's draft. He struck out a lot this year, so his sort of stature has sort of like fallen a little bit because of it. But overall, like, you look at Harbor at first base, Anthony D'Onofrio, Casey Cook, and Vance Honeycutt. Those three guys are in the outfield. Those are kind of the top four hitters, and they're all really, really good hitters, and they all have really, really good numbers in SEC play. And Honeycutt's another stolen base threat. So, UNC is going to be more aggressive on the bases than LSU is. But I think LSU has the advantage with the pitching staff. But then again, like UNC, like they have an obvious top two. I mean, Jason DeCaro and Shea Sprague, both of them have ERAs under 4 in ACC play, which is really key. So it's not like it's not like they just have good numbers because they're, because of non-conference play. Like, in conference play against the ACC competition, they had sub 4 ERAs. So they're not going to be any jokes. And I think LSU is slightly better pitching wise, just because you look at the metrics, you look at the strikeout rates, like in terms of just pure stuff. When you look at the numbers, I think LSU has an advantage there. LSU is one of the best strikeout teams in the country in terms of, getting strikeouts from a pitching staff perspective. And in terms of like fielding independent pitching, which basically sort of eliminates, singles, ground balls, doubles, triples, fly balls. It basically turns ERA into a home run, strikeout, walk stat. And LSU is top 10 in the country in that, which basically shows you that, they strike out a lot of guys. They don't give up a ton of home runs. The pitchers do a good job of controlling the controllables. So UNC isn't quite as prolific at that. So I'd say LSU probably is the more talented pitching staff, top to bottom. I think Luke Holman is, it's going to be close, but I think he's probably better than Shea Sprague, who's UNC's number 2 starter. But it's not going to be easy either, because if I have to pick between the two offenses, I'm picking UNC's. So it's going to be a great matchup. It's going to be absolutely fun to watch.
All that having been said, LSU obviously is going to face some of the better going against SEC competition. Obviously, the Tigers have faced some of the best pitching that you could ever hope to face. The fact of the matter is that LSU is going to face what we assume to be difficult pitching. I'm looking up here, of course, Wake Forest, Wofford, Zach Cowan. Yeah. Zach Cowan is, this will be the first game they play. Zach Cowan is 9-2, 118, 3.55 118 WHIP, 3.55 ERA. Look, this is going to be a difficult, no matter how you slice it. Of course, you're going on the road. It's going to be a difficult regional, no matter how you slice it. You're not going to have that home field advantage, which is, if I were LSU, if I were anybody except for LSU, I would not. It would sort of be neither here nor there. But when you're talking about LSU, that's a huge home field advantage. You're gonna have a crowd that's into it, a crowd that sort of takes off work, knocks off of work early Friday afternoon to go to that 2 p.m. game where LSU typically plays in their first game and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, long story short, LSU is going to face Wofford at 11 a.m. Friday, and in all likelihood, they're going to face a difficult pitcher with a 9-2 record. Let's see, a
He has
I'm
3
sorry,
complete
I'm
games.
looking. Yeah, that's right.
He has
And
3 complete games this season. He's going to go long
and
into the game if he's
and
pitching.
ERA of 3.55. Right. This is not. This is not a, for lack of a better way to put it, this is not a SWAC or a Southland or an OVC pitcher who you think you're going to see who's going to throw a lot of straight fastballs that don't have a lot of movement that you can maybe turn around on and everything like that. This is going to be this is going to be a challenge for the LSU hitters, at least as far as we can tell to this point. This is going to be a difficult assignment for the LSU lineup to face against a pitcher that has put up the proper numbers, but doesn't necessarily have the 99 mile an hour heat, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, like Cowan's willing to pitch a lot, and he has 3 complete games this season. He has his last start came on 3 days rest, and he still went 7 odd innings. I think he threw over 100 pitches. For whatever reason, his pitch count isn't listed for the start he had before that in the SoCon tournament, but he went like 6 2/3 in that game too. So, I mean, this guy has a rubber arm. He's shown that he can throw complete games. You're going to have to hit your way to get him out of the game. Basically,
that's a good way to put it.
Like if he's pitching well, they're going to keep him in the game. And I'll be throwing on, I think, 4 days rest because he pitched on Sunday. He's going to be throwing on 4 days rest, and a lot of that staff is going to be really gassed heading into that Friday game because again, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, that's 4 days of rest. They're not going to be playing by the rules. What I mean by the rules is, don't pitch a guy, try not pitch a guy in less than 5 days rest or any of that nonsense. Right. And, not nonsense, but any of that sort of stuff. So, just be prepared to see a lot of Zach Cowan on Friday, because LSU is going to get a lot of him because he's their best hope on the mound by far for Wofford. So, and the bullpen, the bullpen is just not. It's definitely the weakness of the team. It's nothing you can really, it's nothing to really sneeze at too much, honestly. I think they'll be fine once they get into the LSU's offense will be plenty fine enough once they get into the Wofford bullpen. It's just like, how will they match up against Cowan? What will Cowan look like on the mound against them? And that's the matchup that's going to be really interesting to see.
So let's say that everything goes according to plan. Gage Jump, starts the opener. He's certainly had enough rest. He pitched on Tuesday, right? Am I getting that right?
Tuesday. Yep.
Yeah, he pitched on Tuesday against Georgia, so he will have had plenty of rest. He is your number one starter. He is, as far as number one starters go, he is as good as you could ever hope to have. Where does that leave LSU? Does that put LSU at an advantage against North Carolina? Does that put them even against North Carolina? Where do they stand going into game one?
I think it'll roughly put them at even as long as UNC pitches Jason DeCaro against Long Island and they don't try to, Johnny Holstaff that game just to save their pitchers for later on. I haven't touched on Long Island at all, and there's a chance that LSU ends up playing them if they lose against Wofford. So Long Island's kind of interesting. They've been a Division I school for this is their 5th year in Division I, but their 2nd time in the NCAA tournament already. They made it in 2022. They scored 7 runs in the 9th inning to come back and beat Sacred Heart and win the Northeast Conference Championship. So credit to them. They've had a really good season. They're easily the worst team out of all these teams. They don't really have like an obvious strength. They do get on base at a pretty good clip offensively. pitching staff, there really isn't a ton to sort of jump out at you. Like that's a game that LSU should win. Like if they end up facing them at all, and it's a game that UNC should definitely win as well, especially since they're at home. So I mean, I guess UNC could Johnny Holstaff it, but I don't know if that's going to be their style, because you have to make sure you win that first game. Like it's just as important as the second game in terms of just pure importance, right? Regardless of the competition. So, I mean, maybe you can pitch him less so you can pitch him again later in the weekend. Like you can maybe do that. But I remember when I think a lot of LSU fans were clamoring for Paul Skeens not to start against Tulane, and then they started him against Tulane and everything worked out. I could see, UNC probably doing something like that, throwing DeCaro, because the difference between him and Sprague is pretty minimal. Like DeCaro has a 3.91 ERA in conference play. Sprague is a 3.93. Like there's really not much of a difference between these two guys. They have roughly the same amount of strikeouts. DeCaro's 48, Sprague is 45. Sprague's thrown 2 more innings. Like these guys are basically the same pitcher, in a sense. It's going to be really interesting to see like how Sprague matches up against an LSU lineup. But LSU strength again is their pitching; it's not their lineup. So I think that if LSU had this fantastic lineup, I wouldn't be quite as worried about this matchup for LSU. But the fact that the offense has been up and down this season, it definitely opens up the door for UNC if they can get on top of Luke Holman. And that's going to be a major key for this LSU team. If like Luke Holman pitches like the guy who pitched in the SEC tournament, 6 no-hit innings against the number 2 team in the country, LSU will be fine. But if he's not at that level, then they're going to have trouble winning that game, unless they really get the Sprague. So it's going to be really interesting to see how, it all sort of shakes out. And I mean, after and assuming they have to play UNC again to advance, UNC doesn't really have a really good number 3 starter. Aiden Haig has sort of done the job lately. 5.18 ERA in conference play, which isn't horrific. 5 starts. Fulger Boaz was kind of their starter, their number 3 starter, and then he got hurt. So they've only had 4 different starters in ACC play, which is kind of remarkable when you look at all these other SEC teams that are like, rotating in and out guys from 1 through 3, or at least with the number 3 spot. They haven't pitched a lot of guys in ACC play in general, which is really interesting. And I mean, that might have to change against LSU. It kind of tells me that they're willing to throw relievers for just longer periods of time. But like Dalton Pence, Matt Poston, and Matthew Matee are kind of the 3 guys to keep an eye out for out of the bullpen for them. Poston's a lefty, and they all have pretty solid ERAs, all under 4.2 in conference play. All these guys have thrown at least 19 innings in ACC play, so like those guys have some length. Those are kind of the 3 names to sort of look out for out of the bullpen. What if they can, get the Sprague? So it's like this UNC team, they're very well rounded. Like their pitching staff isn't necessarily as good as their offense is. I don't think, at least. They don't strike out a whole lot of guys. I kind of mentioned that earlier, but they're not really like a high stuff strikeout sort of team, which could help LSU. We'll see. But at the same time, like UNC is kind of a pitcher's park, and it's they're going to have to kind of single, and they might have to single and double their way to winning that game. So more opportunities for them to put the ball in play. It should help LSU's offense, and LSU's high strikeout rates is only going to obviously play well in a pitcher's park. So again, like this is a fascinating matchup. I think UNC is probably the better team. But I wouldn't be shocked if LSU, especially if they win those first 2 games, and they're going to have Luke Coleman for that first matchup against UNC. If they win that, and then all of a sudden they're in a super and potentially going to Arizona and playing Jay Johnson's former team. I don't know how much we want to get into that, but that was an interesting pairing for sure.
Well, let's talk about the first couple of games, or at least what LSU fans hope are the first couple of games in Chapel Hill. What odds do you give them to be able to win that first game in Chapel Hill, and then beat North Carolina in the second game in Chapel Hill to be able to get to the championship round without having any losses and just sort of be in the catbird seat?
Yeah, that's their best chance of moving on here. Even it wouldn't be a guarantee for them to win that third game, but you'd have two shots at it. And given the way that a couple different guys from the bullpen sort of stepped up at the end of the SEC tournament, you feel a little bit better than that than you did before. Even though the Christian Little lat injury is worrying.
That's
Potentially
big.
not having him for the
Yep.
regional. They might have him though. So I mean, when he came out of the game, it looked more worrying than it ended up being. But at the same time, it's definitely going to be
But
a
losing him
storyline for
as
them.
but losing him as a potential setup man, at least to this, particularly over the last 3, 4, 5 weeks, it seems like he had really, really come into his own, and I don't want to say nail down a very, very specific role, because he did not necessarily have a specific role, but Christian Little had played a key part in LSU's resurgence and ability to be able to make it into the SEC tournament and the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we can get into the bullpen a little bit more eventually, but just to answer your question specifically, I think chances of beating Wofford, I don't know, 70, 75%, something like that. Like, they're the better team. They're the more talented team. They should win the game. But at the same time, Wofford does present some challenges to the point where you can't just roll out of bed and play the game. Wofford demands that of you. And I think that's sort of the takeaway more than anything else, is just, especially with how good that offense is. Like, they're going to put up some runs in this game, probably.
No, it's
If they get the jump, especially if they get the
right.
jump and they get them out of the game by the 6th or 7th inning, it could get interesting for LSU's bullpen. So I think LSU's arms are the most talented arms Wofford will have faced all year. Like, that is, without denying, that is almost certainly true. But at the same time, like, if LSU's guys aren't on, they could lose that game. And that's, I think, something you definitely keep an eye out for. But I still give their odds at 70, 75%, something like that. And then if UNC wins, assuming that they win, and LSU wins, then that second game in Chapel Hill, I would say LSU's odds are around probably 40% again. I think they match up well in the fact that Luke Holman's probably going to be the best pitcher pitching in the game in that game. But LSU doesn't have the better offense heading into that matchup, even though those two teams have the same exact amount of home runs, which is kind of funny. The same exact number, like they're tied for 21st in the country at home runs. So these are two powerful offenses, just in terms of pure power. But UNC's been the more consistent offense all season, and it's going to be, and I think the gap is enough to say that even though the ACC is a weaker conference, it's not weak enough to the point where it's even, right? That's what I think.
Weaker conference is very much. It's one thing to say, okay, you're a weaker conference, but you're Conference USA. It's another thing to say you're ACC. We're only talking about a very minimal difference between the ACC and the SEC.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And ACC is a really good conference, and they were the best team in the regular season. Like, that's the best way to put it. And that's a tough draw if you're LSU, because if you look at a lot of the other 1 seeds, I think they would have had a better shot against East Carolina, for example. Not that they would have been paired up with them, or even in Oklahoma State, right? And like some of these other schools, or Arizona. Like, I think they probably would have won I haven't done a deep dive on Arizona, but if I had to make a guess, I think they would have probably won that regional. Or NC State is an amazing offense, and LSU had the pitching staff to sort of keep them down. Like, if they were in Raleigh instead of Chapel Hill, I would have liked their odds probably better there. But again, they're playing one of the 4 to 5 best teams in the country in UNC. And even if you want to say that, the ACC is a weaker conference and they would have been probably about as good as Georgia in the SEC, then they're still an excellent team. It's like that's still a big challenge. And there's a reason why Georgia finished ahead of LSU in the SEC standings this season. Even though LSU beat them in the SEC tournament, LSU obviously had the pitching advantage in that game as well. So like, I think that having Luke Holman is huge. I think having the pitching to at least potentially tamper down this UNC lineup is big. The fact that it's kind of a pitcher's park, it probably helps LSU in this scenario. It's a slight pitcher's park. It's not massive, at least according to the metrics of what I saw from an Action Network story. It's
important.
Close.
Yeah.
It's close. And I think that all helps LSU. And I think the fact that LSU is playing really good baseball right now, like obviously, it helps their confidence at the very least, even though, I do think that adage of, you're hot heading into the tournament is a bit overstated just because we've seen so many cases of the opposite. Whether it's not just in college baseball, really all of sports. Like this LSU a year ago, just to use LSU as an example, LSU a year ago was struggling heading into the tournament. I mean, they were a 500 team in the second half of conference play and went 1-2 in the SEC tournament, and then they went on to win the College World Series. So, the whole how hot are you thing, it's nice, but it's not. I don't know how much of a predictor it really is.
That's it. They were not guaranteed to make a deep run. They did not have the most exceptional end to the regular season, that anybody could ever hope to have. But once you got it in the clutch time, then yes, LSU won. Results speak for themselves. Everything came together at the right time, and LSU won the College World Series. So.
Yeah, you saw some good signs in the SEC tournament with the pitching staff.
That's right.
And that was, even though they lost those games, like the offense just kind of had a bad week, and that's why they went 1-2. It wasn't because of the pitching, which the pitching was the problem at the end of the regular season last year. But anyway, you sort of answer your question, though.
You had a feeling, that, hey, look, things might be ready to turn around.
Yeah,
and make the big turn toward, okay, yes, we can make a charge for this thing. So
yeah.
Apples and oranges, yes, but nonetheless,
it's just an example. Yeah, and again, Lynn, I just think this is a tough matchup for really all the teams involved. Like, if you're a team like UNC and you played as well as you did during this season, to get a team like LSU as your two is that's just cruel. I don't know how else to put it.
We talked about that. No, Koki, we talked about that even last week when we thought LSU might wind up being a number 3 seed. Right? Like, hey, how would you like to be Oklahoma State or whoever it is, hosting the Stillwater Regional, and you see these guys coming in as a number 3 seed. No, if you're North Carolina, you're thinking, geez, we got these guys? You kidding me?
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
We got a team that can beat anyone any day,
That's right.
And it's not like a 2 seed that kind of has a bit of a cap ceiling, but had a very good year. It's not. I'm having trouble even thinking of an example.
Well, it's not some MAC team that have fantastic year, but you don't know for sure.
No offense to Indiana State, but it's not Indiana State. Like it's, or even San Diego, for example. I'm being very disrespectful to these non-major conference teams, but it's like they don't have the level of talent that LSU does.
Right. You bring up a fine point in the sense that, and I'm just making up a team. I don't actually mean what they did this year, but Ohio University or whoever it is that had just a dynamite year and winds up with a 40-win season and or something like that, and winds up in your regional. Well, okay, if you're hosting the Chapel Hill Regional and you're UNC, okay, I could live with that. Watching, and I'm sorry, this makes a difference. Watching the uniforms, watch it walk in. The gold LSU uniforms, the purple LSU uniforms, or whoever it is. I mean, this is, however you want to put it, the old, akin to the old 1970s UCLA basketball, or 1980s Alabama football or whatever it is. It's like, man, you see these uniforms walk in, the LSU baseball uniforms walk into your
Mm.
regional. You're like, damn, man, you serious? We
Yeah.
really couldn't have gotten a better draw than this.
Yeah.
So no, I think that's something. I think that's to be believed, and I think there's something that's very real to that draw that Chapel Hill got, and to the folks at Chapel Hill, to the folks in Chapel Hill who are paying a decent amount of attention to the regional and the field that they could have gotten.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not like I mean, this LSU team has the potential to win the whole thing, like in terms of just potential. And you don't really run into too many two seeds that have the potential to win the whole darn thing. Even though there were a couple two seeds this year that could have very easily been ones, like Duke is one team, Mississippi State, and then they didn't end up getting the one because it went to like Arizona, for example, even though they were
No, it's a good
31st in
example.
RPI, for
Yep.
example, or ECU, which kind of struggled down the stretch because of injuries. And Wake Forest is in their regional with that's a very fascinating matchup. But yeah, like if LSU wins these first two games, I think they should move on. Like they're going to find a way with the rest of the pitching staff. They're going to push harder with their relievers than they did at the SEC tournament. And I think because of that, and because of that like aggressiveness and sense of urgency that they're going to have, that they didn't have in Hoover, because you couldn't have it in Hoover because you had to save it for this weekend. I think that's going to help them. And that's if they win these first two games. That's why these first two games are probably the most important games. And then after that, you're in the driver's seat, and you just need to win one more out of two to move on. And I think they can definitely do that if they win those first two games. But it's going to be very hard to win those first two games.
But they should be. I mean, Las Vegas is not going to have odds on this kind of thing, but they should be favored in those first two games. They should be favored to be able to, once all is said and done, they should be ready to face North Carolina, with one loss, no losses, whatever it is. They should be ready to face North Carolina at the end of the Chapel Hill Regional. That's the chalk. I'll put it to you like that. And if they don't get there, they don't get there. But they do have enough pitching, enough hitting, enough defense to be able to get to that point. And hey, look, who knows what happens? You get to that point, you may find yourself in Omaha. So I think you've come from a very, I don't want to say non-intriguing, because I think they were always intriguing LSU baseball this season. But you went from a decent contender status to all of a sudden, wait a second, you win a couple games, and now you're among the top national contenders for the national championship, which I do not think would have been thought of as a reasonable deal, even 3 months ago.
And the thing is, like, I think UNC is in that same bucket. Like, UNC has Omaha hopes too, and they should. Like, this is probably the best team in the ACC. And the fact that you put these two teams together now, which LSU is, one of the sleeper picks out of the SEC now. And I'd say in terms of like odds to make it to Omaha, like in just terms of like if you had to rank the teams of like, I guess including the matchups, like if you had to rank the teams in terms of odds to make it, to Omaha. I mean, LSU, just in terms of pure talent, has to be in the top 10 or 15, right? Like, I mean, they were in the top 25 D1 baseball rankings heading into this week, actually. So, which just was kind of an interesting turn of events. Like they finally got back into being a ranked team again after not being ranked for a month, basically. So yeah, this is all. It's just fascinating because I think like you could definitely make the argument that these two teams are better than everybody in the Arizona regional. The Arizona regional, it's a deep regional because West Virginia is a pretty good team. It was a very good 3 seed. And I think it's San Diego is the other team that's over there. So in San
Yep.
Diego, I mean, I
Yep.
kind of just disparage them, but I don't think they're that much worse. I think they're ahead of Arizona in RPI, actually.
No, you're right.
And then there's Arizona.
Yep.
So which won the Pac-12 regular season and conference tournament. So that's a very deep regional, but that's not like, but none of those teams you're picking to win the whole thing. Like
That's right.
you could pick LSU and UNC to win the whole thing. That's the difference, right? And that's why this regional is so huge, and that's why you can't really talk about title odds until you see how the bracket shakes out and who faces who, right? Because it's so dependent on the matchups, and this is a tough matchup for both these teams. If LSU wins it, I wouldn't be surprised at all. If UNC wins it, I wouldn't be surprised at all, because these are two Omaha, destined teams. And, if you just had to say, pick the 8 teams that make the field, you could easily make a case for these two teams being one of the 8 teams, but they're facing each other. So one team's not going to make it. And I'm going to be very, very fascinated to see what that team is. Actually, it's not San Diego. I'm pretty sure it's Dallas Baptist. That's the other team, not San Diego. I just remembered that off the top of my head, but my mistake there. But Dallas Baptist, that's a good team too, even though they haven't. That's a constant. That's a challenge for anyone, even though I don't think that's a team that's going to necessarily win the whole thing. But they're good. That's a great baseball program. They've been great every year for a reason. So it's again, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see how all this sort of shakes out. And you mentioned the uniforms earlier. I did want to briefly mention this, like, great uniform matchup this week between UNC and LSU, right? Like, you get the purple or the gold, or and then with UNC is like that light blue and white. It's just beautiful. So it's one of the best uniform matchups in the whole country, I'd say.
No, I can't. Riley. I cannot rightly disagree with you. I can't speak English all of a sudden. Something's wrong. No, gentlemen, this has been a pleasure. We will wrap it up here. This is very interesting insight into LSU baseball and the NCAA regionals, into a little bit of LSU recruiting as well. But gentlemen, we appreciate it. We will catch you back on the other side. We will be back to obviously to make note of what happened in the regionals and to see if LSU is able to advance into the super regionals, which I frankly, not for nothing, we've seen this happen before. I wouldn't surprise me completely if Florida State winds up walking into the super regionals and winds up with a date, whether it's in Omaha or earlier on, winds up with a date with LSU. So we will see about that.
You mean Arizona?
Yeah, Arizona as well. Yeah. I know that's where they're paired up with, but hey, look, I'm a Mike Martin fan, so I'll leave it at that. Mike Martin Jr., God bless him, and Link Garrett, God bless him, for getting Florida State's program back sort of up and running, everything like that. It wouldn't surprise me if LSU winds up facing those guys in Omaha eventually. I don't mean right this moment, but eventually it wouldn't surprise me, because they've had a hell of a year, and Link Jarrett has done a hell of a job in Tallahassee. So anyway, we'll leave it here. Koki, we appreciate you coming on what is this?
Tuesday.
Sunday afternoon? Tuesday?
Yeah.
It's all running together, man. That tells you what kind of time we're having. It's the summertime. We're coming to you on a Tuesday afternoon. We will talk to you a little bit more, and we will get in front of this, and we will come back to you with more analysis on the LSU Sports Insider. For Koki Riley and myself, I am Perryn Keys. This has been the LSU Sports Insider.